I'm looking at how companies are marketing to their audiences and seeing that they're not quite getting it right every time.
Welcome to another edition of Wicked Problems. Today, I'm joined by Jess Shanahan. Now, Jess is a writer, speaker, and facilitator working at the heart of the electric transition. She's a founder of something called Charge Happy, where you can go to that website and find places to charge that are maybe slightly more interesting than just a motorway service area. She's the winner of the EV Cafe Award for Outreach and Education, and she was shortlisted for Cox's Automotive's Woman of the Year 2025. Jess and I have been meeting at the different EV events over the years, but we really got talking at this year's 49 Collective Summer Celebration, where we both happened to end up in the pub talking about EVs and AI, and found that we had a lot of overlap. And that's what you're going to hear us talking about today. We're going to be talking about EVs, we're going to be talking about AI, and we're going to be talking about organizational change and transformation. So 3 subjects that are really dear to both of our hearts. Jess is an amazing woman. You're going to love it. I know you are. Hey, Jess, welcome to Wicked Problems. Wicked to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Yeah, great. We met at the 49 Collective, didn't we?
We did,
a little while back, and somehow found ourselves, I don't know how this happened, but we found ourselves in a pub afterwards having a chat about all things EV, AI, and various other things.
Yeah.
And we thought it might be quite fun to do this, because I think quite a lot of what we were saying was not all aligned, but certainly complementary. So I thought this might be good fun. But before we get into it, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, of course. So I have been working within the e-mobility industry for the past 10 years. I got into it because I did a press stunt for a hotel chain where I drove 2,500 miles around the UK and Ireland in a Kia Soul EV, which did about 100 miles to a full charge. Actually, not even that when we were on the motorway. But I fell in love with that, even though it was, really like throwing myself in the deep end. It was an incredible experience. I've, worked with EVs ever since. But now I'm kind of closing the communication gap between what companies want to say and what their audience kind of needs to hear, what their audience is interested in. So that's whether that's through writing things, facilitating workshops, or speaking on stage, or doing videos, podcasts, things like this. So very deeply embedded in the e-mobility world.
Interesting. And I'd actually love to touch on the gap between what companies want to say and actually what customers need to hear. So we'll do that in a little bit, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we get to that, though, I did mention the 49 Collective, which is where we met, and maybe we should just tell people who maybe haven't heard of it, and I'll put a link to it below the notes for this episode, but might be appropriate if you were to say in your words what it's about.
Yeah, so I'm a signatory of the 49 Collective, and it's really about ensuring that women are getting the correct opportunities in the workplace, considering we make up, such a huge part of this industry. And it's run by, or it was set up by Jill Noel, who she's done loads for women in this space. And she also runs Global Women in EV Day. And the 49 Collective is kind of an offshoot of that, and a way for companies to get involved, to say, yeah, look, we're gonna sign this and become part of this, to kind of show their dedication to changing things in terms of equality within the industry. But the event was just a really nice celebration of what women are doing in the industry, and there were some excellent panels, lots of lovely networking. Got to speak to everyone in the industry that I already know, plus new faces, which is always nice. And then, yeah, as these things often end up, we were in the pub afterwards, which was nice. It's nice to extend the pie a little bit, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And just because that's also how you get more conversations going and so on. And you're right, the 49 Collective initiative by Jill, I think Rich Smith's involved as well.
Of course.
Yeah, and I think it takes its name from the fact that 49% of the driving licenses in the UK are held by women, and therefore they have just as much experience, knowledge, capability as men do when it comes to probably when it comes to anything, but certainly when it comes to driving. And therefore it makes sense for them to be fairly and equally represented in the workspace in the EV driving world, whether that's in OEMs or consultancies or charge point operators or whoever it might be. So I think that was the intention, just to for the benefit of anybody who didn't know. You mentioned the gap between what companies want to tell people and what people want to hear. I wonder if we could explore that for a few minutes.
Of course, yeah. So in being within the marketing world for just over 15 years now, I've kind of got to the point where, I'm looking at how companies are marketing to their audiences and seeing that they're not quite getting it right every time. Some do, some brands, and I'm not just talking about automotive here, some brands are great at it. But I certainly find within the e-mobility, because of the way that this industry has grown, a lot of companies still haven't found their feet, and everyone seems to be kind of just parroting the things that they think is important, when actually the average driver, and I'm talking about now that we're more getting in towards that like mainstream adoption, the average driver doesn't care about a lot of that stuff. So a lot of what I do is taking data and turning it into a story. So a lot of companies want to be like, hey, look, we've got this statistic and here's something that you need to know about our charging curve or our battery technology. And like, I love that stuff. I'm a proper nerd. I want to know that stuff, but the average person doesn't. So I'm really, of the mindset that an electric vehicle is just a car to the majority of people. There might be some fun things about it. There might be some stats that you want to know, but for the majority of people, they want to know, is it comfortable? Will it get me from A to B? Should I believe all of the nonsense that I've read in the mainstream media about these cars? How will it suit my lifestyle? They're really the things they want to know. But I feel like this gap also exists on the B2B side, and that's where I do a lot of my work, is that people are still talking to B2B customers like they're talking directly to a business and not to a human. So I'm really trying to humanize a lot of the marketing content and the way that any brand speaks to its audience within this industry, because they're often missing a trick there.
So if I hear you right, then what's happening is a lot of companies are trying to talk to other companies without personalizing the message, without realizing that what they're talking to in those other companies are just other people who work in an industry, the same industry that they work in, albeit maybe in a slightly different part of it. And
yeah, exactly that.
That means the message is landing flat because actually I'm a person I don't want to be sold to. I don't want to be told that this is great because I actually want to have some human connection in the messaging. Is that
exactly
fair?
that? Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So I really find that I had a client many, many years ago who was like, right, we need to start using you in our B2B writing. I was like, that makes sense. We want to be talking directly to the reader rather than to a company or to a board. But in recent years, I've had companies go, no, we can't talk directly to the reader. We have to talk to the board. And I'm like, that's wrong. And it feels like there's this move towards being more formal than we've ever been in our writing. And that's absolutely the wrong way to do things. And I feel like a lot of marketing copy, especially B2B, is very, very dry. There's no humor. Everyone thinks that they have to be corporate and formal when that's not the right approach. And, maybe this is a good segue to talking about AI potentially, but with AI now, because a lot of people are using that for writing in some part of their workflow, a lot of copy is getting even more similar. And a lot of companies have to really be aware of that if they are using AI in that way.
That's an interesting point, but I do a lot of research with AI and a lot of in-depth testing and all sorts of other things. One of the things about AI, of course, is an algorithm. And there's a couple of things to worry about or think about, perhaps is better, when you're using an algorithm to produce. I have very clever algorithms, don't get me wrong. But one of them is, there's a number of things, but one of them is the algorithms revert to the mean. So the more you use it and the more other people use it for the same thing, the more similar, the more into that reversion to the mean will happen. And so you will end up guessing, particularly if you don't know how to prompt, how to hear your prompts, how to check what it gives you. I mean, a lot of people don't check the output. They just go, oh, it looks really good and plausible. This is why people get caught out with, there was a legal firm recently, they got chastised by a judge because their case studies that they cited in court, were made up by the AI. We've seen a consultancy firm in Australia have to repay $400,000, I think it was, to the Australian government because it made up citations in a report that they charged a huge amount of money for that had been written by AI. So it's at your peril if you don't double check what's there, because a lot of, when it does produce nonsense, it's very plausible sounding nonsense. And then, of course, the other thing is you end up with lots of posts that look very much the same as each other. And it's tempting. I've been guilty of it myself in the early days. It's very tempting to to do it, right? And then you go, oh, well, hang on a second. When I look at this stuff, it doesn't quite look right. Let's investigate why that is. And then you get into the mechanics of it, as I have quite a lot. And so I think, it is a trap that people need to be wary of, that AI can, yes, it looks like it does a fantastic job very quickly for you, but in fact, it can lead you down some very awkward paths. And so there's that reversion to the mean, there's that plausible sounding nonsense, and then there's the fact that there's something called cognitive offloading, right? So if you trust the AI a lot, what happens is you're offloading the thinking, your higher order thinking skills are being offloaded to the AI. So the AI is doing that thinking for you. That means that your ability to use those higher order thinking skills is actually atrophying. So over time, you're losing the capability that you had, because the brain's very elastic. It changes and it grows or shrinks depending, its capabilities in an area, depending on how often you use it. And so if you stop using those higher order thinking skills, it just goes, oh, that's okay. I won't need to use them anymore. I'll prioritize something else. And actually the people that used to be able to have that critical thinking capability, those higher order thinking skills, that logic, that personalization that you bring, that atrophies, and that means that the copy stays just stays bad.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated by this, and when ChatGPT started getting quite popular, I thought, I'll try this. I'll try it for some planning and for some strategy. And I was like, okay, well, it's given me tons of stuff. There's like one or two good nuggets in there, and I did it a couple of times for my own brands. And then I sat down to do something for a client. I was like, I'm not going to use AI. They're paying me. And I sat down and thought, my brain just isn't kicking into gear with this. I'm not actually being able to quickly think up ideas, and ideas are my whole thing. So I was like, okay, no more AI for that. That was really frightening. And then, when we were then talking in the pub about this, it was really interesting to know that this is a thing. And you can see that a lot of people are going to fall into this trap who, they might be overworked. They might be looking for ways to just do something more quickly. And yes, AI might be able to come up with those ideas, let's say, but it's still never going to be better than a human that has worked in this, who can think around corners, who can think outside the box. So if everyone is using AI for this stuff, then all of the ideas, like you were saying, reversion to the mean, all of the ideas are just going to get worse and very, very similar. But then I think that presents an opportunity for humans who can still use critical thinking skills to then think outside the box. But it's quite worrying, because a lot of people don't care enough or don't think enough to think about cognitive offloading. And that applies whether someone's using it, to work out what a text message means from a person that they fancy, or whether that means in business. It applies in all walks of life, and however you use AI.
It does. It really does. There's been some tragic cases of this where, I am the world's worst PowerPoint person, right? There's nothing wrong with the structure. I can get the structure of the presentation right. But boy, it's like I've got some PowerPoint dyslexia or something, because when I draw the pictures, they just look like a 5-year-old did them. And they're just not, none of my presentations were ever board ready, even though I was on some boards and worked with some C-suites. So it was just embarrassing. And AI, if I use it correctly, if I come up with the content and I come up with the structure, it's fantastic. It can build the deck to look really professional and polished, and I can stand up and I can give that presentation, and then I can answer any questions. What I have seen, and this is where the tragedy is people who maybe have better drawing skills than I certainly have used AI to create the entire deck. So they've just gone, give me a deck about battery charging technology in the 26. And the AI goes off and does some research. Maybe it hallucinates a bit or something, but then it produces let's say a 10-page deck, and somebody goes and confidently presents it to their board. And then they get asked a question about the data, and they don't know how to answer it because they didn't actually do the work to create the data themselves. So they get caught out, and that's embarrassing for them. I mean, can you imagine standing there feeling like the world's opening up beneath you and you're just going to get sucked into a hole and crushed? It's a terrible feeling for someone to have to go through, and it's unnecessary, because if they put that little bit of effort in. Now, I understand that overburdened sense that people might have. I think you were alluding to, I'm busy, people want more from me, my time is that. But we have to help organizations strike that balance, I think. And one of the things we talked about before was organizational change and transformation. We'll carry on talking about AI as well. But organizational change and transformation, there's you've got these different startups, you've got legacy firms, and we're seeing, I think if you look at the press, if you look at the sort of efforts by legacy manufacturers to extend the the mandate so that they don't have to have switched to full BEV by 2035. That in itself is just an indicator, isn't it, that they're struggling to how they're set up and how they transition versus, say, a company that just came in straight as a BEV supplier.
Yeah, and I've done quite a bit of work on this within automotive, is looking at those legacy manufacturers. I'm not going to name any names.
No.
But no points for guessing. It's quite straightforward, the kind of companies we're talking about. But yeah, I've done a lot of work here and looking at how, because these traditional manufacturers have been around for so long, they've built up in a way where they've just been adding systems, and those might be organizational systems, they might be technological systems, but they're so fragmented. Some are so out of date, nothing's talking to one another. It is so hard to untangle that. Whereas a newer manufacturer who's been able to come in and think with a software mindset of simple, iterative, minimum viable product, and built more from a software standpoint and a software organization kind of model, they can iterate so much quicker because they haven't got to untangle all of this legacy IT and all of that kind of stuff that's happening. So they're able to come in and move very, very quickly. And I don't think anyone listening will be like, oh, I haven't seen any of these new brands. Suddenly there's so many new brands coming out, car brands. And that's really exciting as a consumer because we've got so much more choice. But the reason these brands are able to come out so quickly is, because they are able to iterate. They're able to do over-the-air updates to give you new features. All of this stuff that traditional manufacturers might be able to do in part, but it's slow because of how they've been built and these legacy systems and the way their organization is put together. They just can't keep up. So I think a lot of those traditional manufacturers are, scrambling to, try and compete. And obviously that's why they're trying to give themselves more time by pushing things back and looking for loopholes and all of that kind of thing.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's not like they don't have fully BEV capable cars. So I would say they've got the technology. It's got to be something, not we haven't got the technology, the know-how. It's not that. So it's got to be how well tooled up they are, or a combination of that and mindsets within the organization. Maybe there's an old saying that, I don't want to, I'm not going to name names either, but it's an old saying, let's progress as one funeral at a time. Now take that as not as a literal, as a sort of, as an axiom. Is it because people are so wedded to how they've been working for years and years and years that it's very difficult for them to think outside of the system that they're in and make that change? Years ago, there were some of the banks wanted to get into, you've got the challenger banks these days. Some of them are quite established now, but when they were first, presenting as challenger banks, some of the traditional banks, when we need a challenger aspect, we need to be like a challenger, but we know we can't do it with the current team that we've got. So they kept the current teams, and this is what Gartner calls a bimodal system. So you have a mode 1 and a mode 2 organization, and they literally would create the challenger side of their bank with a completely new team, and they weren't allowed to talk to the legacy team. The legacy team weren't allowed to talk to them. It was complete separation. And I wonder if that's what sort of thing that's going to have to happen with some of the legacy manufacturers if they want to, tackle this challenge head on.
Yeah, and I think that it's process, I think, is part of it. But then there's also the human element of executing that process, because I think as humans, we don't like change. We want what's comfortable. That's what's safe. It harks back to, the early days of when we're hunter gathering. Like, we want the easiest path, and we're always going to choose that path. And for the average person working in a large company, they're not motivated to do anything differently. So I think mindset is a huge part of it, of this has to come in these large organizations. This has to come from the top down to make sure everyone is on board. Otherwise, you can have the best technology in the world. If people aren't using it in the right way, or even if they're actively rebelling against it, which we've seen as well, nothing's going to get done. So actually, I like this idea of, having, an offshoot company of, people that maybe do think more in that new automotive, like software mindset. I think it would be interesting to see how quickly they'd be able to get something done, because I think even though these manufacturers, these legacy manufacturers, they have the technology, they already have the platforms for the vehicles. So why are they struggling to get them out as quickly? It has to come down to people and process. And I think a lot of the time they're shoving new technology on top of already overburdened people and systems. So that technology is never going to work as well. But it's a massive, it's a massive cost and a massive kind of time thing to be like, right, we're going to just fully wipe the slate clean. We're going to start with all new technology, all new workflows, all new people, a different hierarchy. Those big companies can't do that. It would take too long to kind of get up and running.
I think there's a physical side to why they can't do it as well, which is even if we stopped all ICE sales tomorrow, there's plenty of ICE cars on the road, and they are going to have to be maintained, and they are going to have to be serviced, and they are going to have to, field calls from customers and so on and so forth. And there is going to be a second-hand market for them, so dealers will still be selling them. So you can't just say, oh, well, you're in the ICE world, goodbye.
Yeah.
We're just going to have people who understand BEV and software, as you put it, sort of software style of running organization, or maybe a sort of agile with a small a, way of working, because that's just not feasible, because those cars are going to be around. And also, those people have run very successful businesses. What's happening is the sand is moving from underneath them. So in a way, it's not their fault. And some of them should be that. Like if you've grown up in a system and that system has worked well for 30 years and you've grown up in it for 30 years, it's understandable that you're not going to just want to change tomorrow. However, there is a need to make that change. So you've got to balance that, those two things somehow. It's the sort of, the yin and the yang, I guess.
Yeah. I think that's where a lot of, people high up in these companies struggle to find that balance, because you'll have one person coming in going, right, we're using AI for everything. I've seen this in other companies, not in automotive. Someone will come in and go, right, we're going to use AI for everything. And everyone's like, okay. And they'll start doing it. And then everyone else is like, but we haven't defined how we're using AI. We haven't defined what the output should be. All of those things that you created with AI, do it again, because that wasn't what we actually wanted. So there are people coming in trying to do one thing in a company that maybe is done things in a different way, but there needs to be either a transition period or a balancing of these two things, as you're saying. And I think a lot of companies miss that, because, and certainly with automotive manufacturers, they're under so much pressure from new brands coming in. They're looking for quick wins, and I think that's harming them, because it's almost like a panic response. It's a reactive response, whereas they need to be thinking, and they are obviously thinking in terms of wider transformation. But I think that pressure is getting even heavier on them, that they're not thinking as strategically as they might. They're looking for, ways that they can, quickly do a software update so they can match the features of a new vehicle that's come out, when actually maybe that's not the right response. They should be looking for ways to shore themselves up against that competition, so they don't have to keep being reactive all of the time, and they can start being proactive.
That's a really good point, because when you're reactive all the time, actually you become a follower, you become a slave to the follower, in effect, because all your time is consumed by making sure that you're keeping up with whatever the competition is doing. And maybe the competition is not doing something that's worth doing, which is people to ask themselves. And so the better question for ourselves internally is, are we doing what we need to do? How do we make sure that what we do is what our customers really want and is going to keep them sticky with us? And that's where I think a lot of companies maybe go wrong. And that whole thing about AI, we must do everything in AI. I've seen that as well, by the way, with organizations. It's a really, I would say, disabling mindset. I think, if that's the right phrase. It invites you to do AI just because AI.
Yeah.
Right. And there are lots of things that shouldn't be AI. For a start, let's go back to the fact that AI is an algorithm, and it works off probabilities, right? So literally every word you're typing in, it's going, what's the probability of this word meaning this, then with and this context and so on. And it's very good at it a lot of the time, but there are times when it's not, and it's a probability engine. So that means it must make mistakes. It must. So are you prepared to, in that process that you're now designing, what kind of level of risk are you prepared to accept? There are some processes where you can say, actually, I can tolerate some risk. Okay, fine. There are definitely others where you cannot tolerate any. So I would not want to tolerate any level of risk around my financial reporting at the end of the year.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
if I get that wrong, it's going to affect all sorts of things. I would not want to tolerate a level of risk when it comes to safety critical features around on my vehicles or whatever. So there's lots of things where that just doesn't make any sense. And you might have processes that are working just fine as it happens. And then there's the cost element. So tokens cost money. When you use AI as a business, it costs tokens and those tokens cost money. And so if I ask a question like 2 plus 2, what is 2 plus 2? A number of tokens get spent asking that question, even though, I mean, in the early days, the AI would give you by the way, it wouldn't necessarily say 4. It would say 4 most of the time because that's what it's seen mostly in its training data. It didn't do the computation. So if it found 6 as the answer, it would say 6.
Yeah.
Now, that problem's been solved and they hand off to a computational engine and it comes back with the answer because it's a maths question. But you're still spending tokens to get it to hand off to that, to get it to hand back and for it to give you back the answer. And those tokens cost more than just writing a Python script that says what's 2 plus 2.
Yeah.
A lot more. Imagine multiplying ledger.
Yeah, and this is the thing: is companies will say, right, we've got this new AI tool. You can use it for this part, this part, this part of your workflow, but it's there all of the time. People do start then asking those kind of questions, or even messing around with it because, yay, AI, it's fun to talk to. Maybe a lot of people still feel like that. So people are doing it for those, let's say, 3 tasks that they're supposed to use it for, but then they are then saying, hey, can you write me an email? Can you do this? Can you do that? Stuff that they don't actually need help with. They've been doing it very well for, all of their careers. And so companies are seeing these huge token spends and being like, wait, why have we spent all of our budget within the first month of having this thing? It's because everyone is just using it because there's been no guidance on how to use it. People don't know that asking something costs tokens. They don't know that they shouldn't be using it beyond those 3 tasks. There's still so much more education that needs to happen within organizations. And I think, again, the people implementing this technology go, look, we're becoming more efficient. Off you go, use this new tool. Here's a bit of basic training on like the functionality of it. But we're not talking about, how AI works or like what the impact might be if you put customer data in there. Obviously, there is some training on that because everyone's, hot on GDPR and similar things. But I don't think the ramifications are really kind of hammered into these people to know. Oh, they're like, oh, I'll just put this in there, it'll be fine. But actually then they're getting back something false, or there could be a brick, whatever it is. There are all of these risks that we're not talking about because we're talking about how cool AI is and how it can be great for efficiency and everyone must get on board. And I don't necessarily disagree with all of that. I think it is great for efficiency. It is brilliant. It's going to, change so many industries for better or worse. But we're missing a whole part of the puzzle, which once again is the human part and talking about the risk. And as you were saying, like how people are using it and where that risk is allowable and where it's not.
You touched on what I would call shadow AI there.
Yeah.
But people using AI out of the context in which they've been asked to use it. And that's a real problem because people are doing that. And you mentioned GDPR and people being hot on GDPR, and lots of people are, and rightly so. But unfortunately, people do go, oh, I've got this file. I'm going to get this data analyzed by my favorite AI tool, and they upload it into the cloud. And then before you know it, they've done something that's actually caused a data breach, even if they don't realize it, and even if nobody finds it actually but it's still in breach of the regulations in some way. Another, I think, interesting aspect, because we're sort of talking about AI literacy here as well.
Yeah.
The EU AI Act, which obviously doesn't apply in the UK, but it does apply if you want to do business with the EU, which many firms do. And I can see that something like this is going to come because the government's now paying a lot more attention.
Yeah.
And dates AI literacy. So you have a responsibility as a board or as a C-suite in law within the EU to make sure that your team and you are all literate in the use of AI. So if in fact people are doing this sort of shadow AI stuff, you don't have the defense of, well, we didn't know. That's not a defense.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that people miss.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of companies about AI literacy because I've taught a few training sessions on it, and people always say to me, "Oh, like, well, I didn't know we needed that." I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm telling you that you do. Here is the information." I wrote a few blog posts about this because the more I was kind of talking about this stuff, the more I was going, wow, no one knows that this is a requirement. And, some of these are really big organizations who don't know that they need to, train their people in how to use these tools. And a lot of AI literacy is looking at risk, when you should and shouldn't use AI, how you should, look at the outputs, has it hallucinated some statistics or case studies, those kinds of things, but also good prompting as well. And I think you can overcome quite a lot of the risk and issues with AI to a point if you know how to prompt it to get the output that you want. But yeah, I think it's such a big thing that's missing from so many organizations.
You definitely can. Good engineering, prompt engineering, mitigates to an extent. It doesn't remove the risk, but it does certainly help you reduce the risk. So you still need to check those outputs. There's still the risk of cognitive offloading if you just blindly trust what's going on and don't use it for the right things, and don't challenge some of its output, really, even if it's just in your own mind. Like, why did it say that? Okay, well, maybe there's a reason. There's also, I think, these AI models, they come out thick and fast, right? Like, it seems every week somebody's brought out a new one or a new version of one that's just in the market. And that creates another problem, okay? Because there's two problems. So one is model drift, right? So the model I created, my wonderful AI tool that I use every day with, is now not the model that I'm running it against. So what does that mean in terms of what it's doing? It might mean nothing. It might mean that it's improved it, or it might mean it's changed it in a way that I don't understand if I blindly just keep using it. And that could be detrimental. It could have introduced risk rather than reduced risk, or not. And then the other problem is, so if you look at somebody like OpenAI, and it's not unique to them, but there's lots and lots of different models that they have. Are people educated enough in the use of these tools to know which model to use for which type of problem? Undoubtedly, there are going to be lots of people who are. But there's also, I think, going to be a significant number of people who really don't understand the difference between, Fable and Claude now, Fable and one of the older models. Mythos, of course, is not usable by people at the moment unless they happen to be in an invited preview. Do they understand why they're using one versus the other? I think there's a lot of people who don't. And
I agree.
Yeah, so that's got to be a problem.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is one of the things that leads to those high token bills, is someone goes, right, I'll use the smartest, most modern model that I have access to with the highest intelligence to rewrite an email, when actually that's probably not necessary. Whereas, we need guidance on, like, well, why would you use the highest intelligence, like most modern model from one of these companies over a quicker model that maybe has, fewer data points, that is going to use fewer tokens? I don't think I don't think anyone is even, it's not that they're looking at the models going, which one shall I use? I don't even think they're thinking that far. And I'm talking about the average person here, like the average person who's using these tools as part of their job when they're not necessarily in a technical job. I don't even think that they're not interfacing with these tools in a way that is giving them even the chance to critically think about how they work and how they should be using them. They're just saying, it's like any tool. This is your new piece of accountancy software. This is your new podcast platform, whatever. And they go, okay. And then they just use it. They don't think that they need to think beyond that. They're just continuing doing their job with a new tool.
That ties a little bit into your point that you made towards the beginning of this chat that we're having about people who buy electric vehicles not caring about a lot of the things that the companies think they should know about. And I wonder if, should the tool, the interface, I mean, in an API, you have to choose the model, but when people are using a web interface, which many people will be doing at work, you have to select which model you're going to use and what reasoning approach you want to use with that model, the complexity of the reasoning. And I wonder if actually it should be the other way around, where well, this tool is really clever. Why can't it work out at the point of the question being asked which model it should use to answer that specific question, rather than expecting people who are busy and they it's more steps to go click click click, right? and then ask the question.
Yeah, no, I don't think we should be necessarily like dumbing things down for people. I think the information and the education should still be there if people want to know about the numbers and the inner workings of these things. But on the most basic level, it should be intuitive enough, intelligent enough to be able to, to infer these things based on prompts and stuff like that. Just because, again, we're all so busy. And if someone's not in a technical role, or they're not a car person, just to kind of go back to that, they just want to do the thing that product is designed for. And sure, they might get to the point where they're like, actually, I am now interested in charging curves, model drift, whatever it might be. But from the most entry level point, it should be straightforward. Because when we're talking about something that inherently has risk, as we are with AI, it has to be straightforward. And even similarly with cars, like we need to be driving more electric cars than ICE vehicles for all of the reasons that I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast will know. So why not reduce that barrier to entry? But I don't want to be accused of, trying to dumb stuff down. But I think it should be more straightforward, not necessarily simple, but more straightforward.
It's about, I think, making, that straightforwardness, making it easy for people to interact with and to want to use. And then you're right, if people want to take a deeper dive, then that's always available to them, and they should be allowed and capable of doing that. We're coming to the end of our time together, which is a shame because I'm really enjoying this and we're going.
Yeah, me too.
Fascinating topics. But let's talk about, just in closing up, you and the work you do. How do people find out more about that? How do they find out, where do they go to learn about Jess?
You can Google me. That might be the easiest way. That sounds really big-headed, doesn't it? That also sounds cool. Yeah, Google me. I would say probably the best place to start is on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active. That's where I'm talking about both automotive, AI, and a few other things. So yeah, LinkedIn, Jess Shanahan. But then I also have JessShanahan.com, which is more of my personal brand. That's a lot more of my speaking and journalism. And then there's jetsocial.co.uk, which is more of my professional brand, closing this communication gap. Lots more meeting and round table and workshop facilitation stuff on there as well. I'm also on YouTube, and I have a website called chargehappy.co.uk, which is all about finding the most interesting places to charge your car. So you're not, sitting in a sad service station with a terrible coffee. There's so many great options out there. And I road trip a lot and I travel a lot, so I share those.
I will put links to all of those below this on the wickedproblems.fm website, and they'll be included on the YouTube channel as well. I want to say thank you. It's been fascinating. I think the fact that we've both got these sort of common interests about AI, about EV, and organizational change and transformation, which is, one of the things I've been doing for years. I think that has really made the conversation very, very interesting. And I'm sure that people watching and listening will agree. So thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you. This has been great, and a nice extension of our chat we had in the pub. So thank you so much.
Of which I'm sure there will be more.
I hope so.
Alrighty. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss what's coming next. And if something we discussed today is landing close to home, a problem you're sitting with, a gap you can't quite close, that's exactly the kind of thing I work on. I help leaders and organizations work through genuinely complex challenges and come out the other side with clarity and momentum. I'm Toby. Come and find me at strategicflow.io or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what you're dealing with.